Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. You can become the athlete that you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caroe, and as ever, I'm joined by my colleague, Marlene Royle. Hey, Marlene.
Hello, Rebecca. It's nice to see you again.
And hello, Faster Masters, to all the people who are watching us live. I must say, I know we made this change about a year ago to a weekly live show, but it gives me real engagement with our audience. And I get a fantastic amount of energy from having people watching and commenting, and tell us where you're listening from if you're listening right now. I really, really enjoy it.
Well, it's definitely part of my week. I mean, every once in a while, if we have to do something different in a week, I definitely miss it. We're in the routine. My Thursday evening is podcast. Thursday evening is time to talk to people, and give them a chance to ask questions and check in with us.
It's Friday morning with us, and just so that you all know how dedicated I am, we have delayed the start of our Easter holiday so that I can do the podcast. My bag is packed out there, and I will be diving in the car and going as soon as we're done. So, don't hold back.
Right. Yes, I usually make Friday. Friday is usually my day off also, because this way I stay coordinated with Rebecca's schedule, because she's leading into the weekend. So,
yeah. Hey, Cece says, Pocock on Lake Union picture from Stacy. Yes, you're right. I will introduce that in a minute. And hello from Whitby. And a first timer, Martin Hindman. Hello, Martin. Nice to see you. And have you got your good missus out in a single yet? Because he was threatening. He was threatening to teach his significant other how to scull.
But in Minnesota, you probably still have ice in Minnesota.
Yeah, probably right. And Jez from Grosvenor in Chester. I've rowed on the River Dee in Grosvenor. You can go a long, long way upstream until you end up on the bank underneath the Duke of Westminster's estate. Chester's a stunning stretch of water. Hey, Jez, really nice to have you here. Are you a first timer watching live?
So tell us.
And there's Lisa joining us from Colorado, where it's probably also still cold. But hey, we hear that spring is beginning to spring. We know that there are people who are coming out of winter. And doesn't that make you feel good?
I know. Well, last week, remember, it was 20 degrees centigrade here, and you had 20 degrees centigrade. It was so warm at my house. Well, right now we had a big, between that last week, we had a snow hurricane, and then we had a big snowfall last night. So I actually have about 5 centimeters of snow outside today. So that's spring in New England and eastern townships of Quebec.
That's right. Hello, Glenda from Wilmington. Lovely that you found time in your life to join us. We know that you're facing some challenges right now. And Cece has sent me a purple hair photo. Actually, I saw you with your dog and I saw the purple hair. So thank you. Thank you for the purple hair. I forget why we were talking about purple hair, but this is cool.
Does the dog have purple hair too?
Not yet. I do think that's a step. I don't mind people dressing their dogs up in cute costumes, but dyeing your dog's hair. Although I have seen artworks where they have dyed sheep's wool and sort of decorated them onto a hillside and photographed them in lots of colors, which is quite something. Hello, Rich from Casper, Wyoming, where you just got out of the swimming pool. Hey. And Tony Tarlow is in Sherbrooke, and he says it's snowing. Too bad.
Tony's practically my neighbor. So yes, it is snowing, and we're waiting for the ice to melt.
Now, this past week is the part on the podcast where we talk about the work that Marlene and I do outside of our business to advocate for Masters Rowing. And I'm going to kick off because this past week I have been to the Legion of Rowers committee meeting, and we have launched initial expressions of interest for our peer-to-peer coaching clinics that are going to be happening over the next 4 months here in New Zealand. So if you are interested in taking part, go to the New Zealand Masters Rowing Facebook group. There's a link from a post I've put up there where you can go to a questionnaire, and we ask you it's just expressions of interest at this stage. And we've got dates, approximate costs, and a few other questions to ask you. So I very much hope that we'll be able to get these off the ground, and please share and tell your friends. Marlene.
Well, our week was our functional movement assessment webinar, which that was our project for the week, which we did on Monday. But of course, we have, preparation leading up to that. And we had a really, really nice turnout. About 500 people registered for the webinar and were listening in. We had a few, our audio was a little bit messed up on our original broadcasting, but we were able to do a re-recording of that and send out the recording of the webinar to everybody with good quality. And that was fun, and I think we got a lot of good feedback from that, and hopefully that will be something that's really useful for people.
Absolutely. And before I forget, let's just have a look at this. This is called Seattle Sunrise and Moonrise, and Stacey Foster uploaded this into the Masters Rowing International Facebook group. And what a glorious picture. Sorry, I'm just going to get rid of my microphone. That's a little better, and you get to see it a little clearer. You can see the Sky Needle, as well as Stacey and her partner wearing fluorescent shirts out on their scull. Isn't that stunning?
Oh, it's so quiet. The water looks nice and lovely and quiet.
Yeah, I had an amazing scull this week as well. I was doing the 5-minute pieces, and I was in my single. We had a very flat morning, and I just had one of those wonderful outings where, when you just feel really strong. And I have to say that when I haven't been in my single for a while, and I haven't, it usually takes me a couple of practices before I feel my technique and particularly my placements have improved. But actually, I was right back in it, and I just had the most stunning row. And when you're doing rate progressions, and you take the rate up and you take the rate up, and I was on the 4th and final piece, and I just thought, right, your last minute, it was scheduled to be at 28 to 30. Sorry. Yeah, sort of 30, 32. And I was going along at 29, and it was going really well. And I thought, right, okay, let's push it on. And the wheels completely fell off at 30. It was really funny.
Yeah, well, they say that life over 30 strokes a minute is different.
Well, I concur is all I can say to that. Right. Our Faster 5 are some really important principles that we have built the Faster Masters Rowing program around. And in them, we have 5 separate articles that take on what we believe to be the core understandings that you need to have in order to be a successful rower. Now, stroke power is one of them. And I'm going to ask Marlene just to kick off and give a summary of her insight into what it is about stroke power and masters rowing that is so important for us to learn and understand.
You have to be able to, one, get the most meters out of your boat per stroke. So if you are, let's take an example of a race like the Head of the Charles. The Head of the Charles is a 600 stroke race approximately. If you develop your stroke power so that you can drive stronger and you can move your boat farther per stroke, that's going to make a huge difference in a race like the Head of the Charles. For example, if you improve your distance per stroke 2 centimeters or say an inch, that comes out like more than a length, for example, in a race like the Head of the Charles. So stroke power is important. And as masters athletes change, we know that strength training becomes much, much more important because in order to stimulate the protein synthesis in your muscles to develop strength, you have to actually do it. So that means you've got to do resistance training. You've got to do things that stimulate muscle recruitment because of the hormonal changes for women and for men. Though for women, women are affected a little bit earlier in this sense due to menopause. Men, their testosterone changes, so it tends to be a little bit closer, like 60 and older. But in both cases, you have to really stimulate the muscles to keep your muscles strong and to keep your strength levels up. I think it's also important for developing a really, really good rhythm and contrast between the drive and then the flow of the recovery, and then the drive phase, follow through, and the flow of recovery.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it definitely is one of the hardest things to learn from a book. Rhythm and ratio is much easier learned by following and rowing with someone who is a little more experienced than yourself. Yeah, I think that's enough on that. On to a few more of our watchers live. Hi, Brian, says Jez. Good to have two from Grosvenor Rowing Club. Brian hasn't written anything to say that he's here, but hey, that's good.
She knows he's here.
Jess is here from Pennsylvania in the USA.
Great.
Fantastic. And lastly, Andres is here from Boathouse Row in Philadelphia. We always love having our regulars. Now, I confess that I neglected to read our sponsors out earlier, so I'm just going to loop back briefly. The Rowing Chat directory is continuing to grow. We have coming up some brand new listings, which I will tell you in a minute. But for now, right at the end of March, beginning of April, we have the End of the Island podcast for junior rowing in the UK, ES Rowing Services, who are number one in the UK for repairs and spares, the head of the Schuylkill Regatta, the Independent Rowing News, which is the leading print magazine for North America, which had an article from me. I was quoted in an article on the current month, and Marlene writes for them regularly. Kanghua, who are UK agents for the international boats at entry-level pricing. Junior Rowing News, and Champions Connected, which is how to get recruited using mentor advice from elite athletes. And in early April, I will be adding listings for Pontoon, Rantilla Rowing, Rowing Vinyl, Pine Art Boatworks, and Nelson Kellerman. Now, the topic that we want to kick off with this week is about creating training groups. A lot of the clubs that work with the Faster Masters program come to us with common challenges. And there's a particular challenge, which I'm sure that anyone who doesn't just row on their own will understand. How do you train constructively when you have athletes who are different skill levels, different fitness levels, when you have lightweight women with heavyweight men, and self-evidently their boat speeds are very variable. So if you're an organizer for a group or a coach, or you just want to improve the way your training group comes together and practices, we've got some tips now on how to create training groups. Right, Marlene, you do the first tip, and then I'll do the second one.
Okay, I'll talk about if you have a group of singles, because this is something that I do quite a bit, that I run either training groups or technical groups with groups of single scullers. And I think when you're making an effective group, right from the beginning, you want to treat your group like a pod that's going to work together, and think of it like you're a team and you're going to stay together. So it's very important if you're dividing up your group for either different time slots to work with you or a group to work with maybe two different coaches. It's very important that you look first at keeping the group together relative to speed. You can have scullers of different skill levels, because that's something that you can address within the group, especially if you're working on drills. You can easily bring people together to focus on the certain things. But if you've got really different speed levels, it's going to be very difficult to run a group session that's going to be productive. So that's one thing I think is a main consideration. And if you find that you've got, I'll say, a loose wingnut in your group who is just, sometimes as a coach, you have to be very strict to make people follow directions. And so if you've got somebody who just like wants to do their own thing, that's going to sabotage your entire group session. So it's very important for the beginning that, for example, you might say, okay, all 4 of you get your singles on the dock, everybody on the dock together. When everybody's in their boats, I'm going to give you the command to push off the dock, and we're going to push off the dock together and meet right here on the water. And I usually either will lead them off the dock in my single, or I will keep them on the dock, get into my motorboat, and I will escort them off the dock. Because if one person leaves and starts rowing, there goes your group becomes chaos really quickly.
That's a very, very good point. Or as my husband says, they turkey off into the distance. And for myself, I definitely endorse the group rules and acceptable behaviors. From my point of view, if that situation arises, I leave that person to do their own thing. I don't let their behavior sabotage the rest of the group. And I will endeavor to speak with them privately afterwards and say, how was your session? I see you chose not to join in with the rest of the group. How did you go? I try not to be judgmental or arrogant about it. Just point out the choice that they made. And if they complain they didn't get any coaching, you can say, well, this was why.
Yes, that is one thing that if you expect to get coaching, you need to be near the coach. If you row over to the other side of the lake, that is not the best way to get coaching. And if you have that person who splits off, it also depends on what kind of practice you're running as a club. Like you might have multiple groups working on the lake, and if somebody splits off, they might interfere with another group. So, those are things to keep. It depends a little bit on your situation, but being able to keep people together speed wise, I think is the first thing you want to look at, because skills you can work on that within the group.
So my recommendation is slightly different from Marlene's, and it's based actually on what actually happened with my local coaching group this past weekend. We had 12 people signed up and 2 coach boats, and we had decided we were going to work in quads. I did the crew lineups, and we had a women's crew who trained together regularly. We had a mixed crew who have been out before, but there's a mixed double who trains together regularly within that, and a men's double. So that worked out quite nicely, and a men's group. On the day, one of the other coaches called in sick. Now, not particularly a problem, except that we have a very strict rule on our waterway that no rowing boat is allowed to be more than 500 meters away from the coach boat for safety reasons. And so that meant that it was quite clear that with those 3 boats, men, women, and mixed, clearly some of them were going to be faster and slower. And so when we were doing the briefing before we went on the water, I reminded everybody how to do the stationary stability drill, which you'll remember we talked about last week as being it was in the March program, which is actually still available because you always get 2 months on Faster Masters at a time. And I talked about the stationary stability drill as a thing to stop and do if you got in front and you needed to kill a few minutes until the other crews caught up. So that worked extremely well, particularly when the coaches were having a long chat with one of the crews and the other 2 ended up sitting waiting, and they ended up doing competitive stationary stability.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I want video of that. That's great.
The other thing that we did was that we were actually practicing short intervals, and we were able to row 3 abreast. And what the coaches decided to do was, instead of doing distance, to row time. And so they lined us up 3 abreast, and they said, go. And we rode for 2 minutes. And then we stopped and then we regrouped. So we paddled over because some of the steering was, shall we say, divergent, I think is a polite way of describing what actually happened.
Interesting.
That's right. But it brought us back together again. Stop, 2 minutes, go, stop, turn around, 2 minutes going back the other way. And again, that helped us to feel like we were still participating as a group, but they used the rest period between the pieces to do the regroup and the realignment, which was actually, I thought, really, really beneficial.
Yeah, definitely. And that brings up an important point, that if you are waiting, or when you have rest periods, waiting for another crew, or you have rest periods in between your workouts, you can always put in 30 seconds of something like a stationary drill, or 30 seconds of eyes closed, arms only, or whatever. You can, rest periods in between work bouts, can be quite effective, because it's more doing things frequently of high quality, not necessarily that you have to do it for a long time. So, you can do a drill for 5 strokes during one rest period, and then, that's another really good use of time.
More live watchers. Hi to Betsy from the Sarasotas. Hello, Betsy. And Jeanette Brimble is in Ontario with a pretty Canadian flag. And Pamela says, happy Good Friday. Now, I know, although Pamela has a picture of her on her horse, I know she's in New Zealand and in Dunedin. So hi, Pamela. Nice to see you with us.
Nice to see the horse. I love horses.
They don't have any brakes.
No, but my first dream was to go to the Olympics as a dressage rider. So I love horses. That I found rowing came because that didn't happen. So
I have a confession. We went to the Athens Olympics with some friends, and one of them, she was very keen on horses and dressage. And we sat in the stands watching the dressage with Jolie next to us. And my goodness, if she hadn't have been there, I would not have had the first clue as to what was going on. She goes, look, it changed legs then. And I was like, pardon, what? I missed something. Not a great experience. You need someone experienced if you're going to watch dressage. Now, how many people deliberately don't use an electronic device to monitor their rating nowadays? And I'm going to hazard a guess that the number is extremely low. And I know from our training group, we'll get out onto the dock and on the pontoon, and someone will go, oh, do we need a stroke coach? Has anyone got one? And there's a sort of like flat panic and someone's racing out to go and find one. I believe quite firmly that you don't have to have an electronic device. So, Marlene, what's your first recommendation for ways to monitor training without electronics?
Well, in the old days, before electronic devices were available, I used to just put a stopwatch on my shoe in my single, click my stopwatch was running, and I would, if I wanted to check a rating, I would just count the number of entries for, 15 seconds or 30 seconds. So, 2 entries equals 1 stroke, so if you count 6 entries, that's 5 strokes, for example. But when I rode in university, and I typically was a stroke of the 8, we were expected to know what ratings were without any devices. And if the coach said, take it to 24, you had to know how to take it to 24. So we learned without any devices. We learned from, okay, the coach would say, yep, okay, you're that's 23, up a little bit more, up, you're right on 24. Yep. So actually that's how I learned. And I think it's a really good skill to be able to do that.
It is, particularly in a race, because you often find that, looking around or looking down at your monitor actually distracts you and gives little wobbles in your stroke. I, like you, I didn't have a stopwatch. I had a cheap digital watch, which I got a Velcro wristband for, and then I could wind it around the oar handle. And I just learned to count number of strokes in 15 seconds. And it was approximate. Now, recently, we've been training a little bit in eights, and we've taken to having the coxswain call, say we're moving up to 26, getting everybody to move themselves to what they think 26 is, rather than wait and follow the stroke. And that's been a really good discipline as well, because it means you get there more accurately. And it also helps people to see whether they over or underestimate.
Yeah. But it is, I think it really is using the stopwatch method. It's also one thing that you can, if your target is just even say to row 20 or whatever you're rowing, that, you row what you think is 20, and then you use the stopwatches just to confirm whether or not you're on target, but I think that's it's so easy to become too dependent on an app, on a phone. And I met Lucas Spick years ago in Bled. Lucas Spick, the Olympic champion, and one of the things that he talked about, I had a camp in Bled of masters rowers, and he came and had dinner with us. And one of the things he said is, I think it's really important that you be able to row without the electronic devices, so that you can focus on your feel and focus on your rhythm. And he said, and he rowed with it's a chop, and and he also rowed the single. And he said, we do a lot of work without any devices in our boat, exactly so that we're working on boat feel and rhythm. And at Bled, coaches, in all the lakes in Slovenia, you cannot take motorboats on any lake in Slovenia. So coaches are all coaching from the shore too. So
that's a very, very good point. Rich Weaver says that he says there are some spots where he rows with no cell phone signal. I think, Rich, GPS still gets through when a cell phone signal doesn't, because GPS come from orbiting satellites. And unless you're under a bridge or in the shadow or between two very narrow, between two buildings, generally you can get GPS and you don't need to have your cell phone. But hey, it's all good points. And Pamela has a phone app that she uses. Now, our readers often turn up with some really fascinating discussions that we like to share, because they illustrate that there quite often aren't any definitive single answers, and that in rowing, a lot of the time, you have to work things out for yourself. And so this was a discussion started by Glenda. Hi, Glenda, I know you're watching. About Randall foils, which are little fins that you can attach to the top edge of your oar blades that prevent the oars going deep. And she says, I have a love-hate relationship with my Randall foils. They've helped with my blade depth and tracking, but they also row heavy. And she says, I'm thinking of getting some different blades, and I don't know if I want to transfer them. If you've used them and stopped using them, can you tell me your experience? And there were some very, very interesting observations. One of which was that the most efficient blade depth is not actually along the surface, but 1 to 2 inches below the surface, which I thought was interesting and probably physics-based, based on the person who put that remark down. And then I pointed out to Glenda that the heaviness she feels might be because she's getting better connected and staying connected in the water a little longer. It may be the effect of the foils, but and a positive thing, but of course that might be a load that's too heavy for her, and might lead you to make adjustments to your blade length and inboard. So Marlene, do you have any thoughts about Randall foils, or do any of the listeners?
Well, I've never tried them, so I can't say from my own personal experience what my impression is. I do think when you have things like this, possible ways that you can modify, if it's, first of all, what is your issue and what is your goal? Okay, if your issue is keeping your blade level, or keeping your drive horizontal, I do think that is something that you should learn to do properly, and not try to have a device do it for you. So you have to look at, like, are you trying are you really addressing what your issue is or not? I think that's an important thing. But if you look at something that's going to enhance the performance, now it may work for you, it may not work for you. You may like the feel, you may not like the feel. I think it's going to be very individual. And if you like the feel and your goal is to go faster and to do better in your races, and you feel like it is helping you do that, then by all means, and it's legal, right? By all means, do it. I mean, absolutely. I'm not saying that I think it's something that's absolutely necessary, but for some people, perhaps it changes the feel that it makes them more effective. So, I would not categorically say, yes, I'm for this or against this, because I really think it depends on how it impacts your rowing. And if it is positive and you want to go faster and it's working for you, why not?
I think that's very, very true. I slightly take issue with your point, Marlene, about learning how to do it properly and not using a device. I just think devices can be a path towards learning to do it properly. So I have on my single the Magic Oarlocks, which have a swing arm inside the gate, which has an elastic tension band on it. And these help you to feel a very definitive square and feather. And they help to hold the blade against the pin. Now, you could argue there you go, you see, we disagree. Yeah. I enjoy them. And so I continue using them. And I've also used them very successfully with novices, particularly people who are challenged with holding the oar too tightly, so they don't always know when the blade's square and when it's feathered. It's not dropping fully onto the square. So that can be helpful.
Yes. Well, it depends on what you want to achieve and also what the tension is, because sometimes they're too tight and you have to use your wrist to feather if they're too tight.
For sure. Yeah. So, and you need you need to grow that muscle as well. People say that they feel sore when they first use it.
But you can, there's no reason you have to do one thing the same way all the time too. Like you said, you could use it as a learning instrument and then change back, or again, if it makes you row better, maybe that's good.
Yeah. So Lisa says she uses C2s with foils for training purposes, and they help with the blade depth and teaching me to put both blades in the water at the same time. Well, that's a great learning objective. And then she switches to a different pair of blades for her regular everyday and racing. So she uses them as a training aid, which is pretty interesting. Andres has said, what about when you row on rough water? They won't help you. It's interesting. I imagine the top tip just slices through the waves, but again, we'd have to practice it. And then the lady who asked the original question, Glenda, my issue was that I couldn't hold a straight line, a dip on one side that I think developed after I broke my wrist. Fair dues. So really good observations there. And maybe you should have a little chat with Lisa and find out why
Glenda, Glenda, fly to Colorado. But but these are important things to look at and to look at, again, if it's corrective and it helps you, or some people just don't like when there's a change of what they're accustomed to, and they just, there are people who just don't like to change sometimes. But, as I said, if you discover that it's a way to help you row better and move the boat more successfully, that ultimately that's what we're after. There have been people who've rowed in the world championships with them, and there are lots of people who don't. So you can go fast either way.
So I think on balance, the advice is, if you can afford the money to go and try things and accept that they might be a total failure, or they might be a rip-roaring success, or somewhere in the middle. I think the biggest challenge with foils particularly is you glue them onto your equipment and you can't just put them on and off. It's not like a pair of gates where it's reasonably easy to switch them out. So that's a consideration, and, depends on your personal budget.
Definitely.
This week, we were very sad to hear of the death of Larry Gluckman, who is a very well-known leading coach in the USA. And we want to honor his memory. And Marlene had the opportunity many times to work with him. And so we thought we'd just spend a little time with some fond memories of a great coach.
Yes, well, and I think it's something that when people pass away and as older athletes, and we have people who are our coaches or people who were our mentors who are older than us, I mean, I think we do deal with passing away of close friends and family, but people in our rowing community can affect us quite a lot too. And Larry was somebody who was he was an outstanding oarsman himself. He worked on the university level, on the national team level. He was very involved with Craftsbury. I had the opportunity to work with him for 5 years at Florida Rowing Center, as well as over the course of 20 years at Craftsbury quite often. So, it was just wonderful to have a coach who was always looking for creative solutions. And Larry was one of his main ideas was the only limitation you have is your own imagination. We can solve problems and be creative for anything we do on the water or anything in the ways that we teach. So he was a mentor for me, and at the same time we were very close colleagues, and we exchanged a lot of information and experimented with things a lot together. And his sudden leaving us, I think, has affected a lot of people unexpectedly and quite deeply, because it was just Larry. He's just always there. He's one of those great pillars of our rowing community in the United States and internationally as well.
I think there's often a feeling when someone does die that there's an urge to recall all of their coaching techniques and their tactics and their approach, so that becomes a training and learning resource for future generations. And I was really inspired when Row 2K have put up a very nice piece about it, which includes a video of Larry talking about his life. And then I also went and dug out the interview that I did with Larry on Rowing Chat, where he talks about his coaching. So if you're interested in learning from the man himself, there are two really nice resources that I commend to you.
Absolutely. And the dedication to Larry is right now, it's on the homepage of row2k.com. And the video is all the way down at the bottom. It's John Bigelow, who was also one of our national team scholars, interviewing Larry a couple of years ago at Craftsbury. And he tells his life story, and it's an hour and 25 minutes long. And I am telling you, he tells some fascinating stories that really show what this whole era of rowing has been about, and all the things you take for granted: Hudson Boat Works, Vespoli, Cal Coffee, the simulator. All these people started rowing together in the 70s, and he was one of these group. The Bill Miller, the Dreisegakers from Concept 2, they were all the one group. So all of these things that we're accustomed to today, Concept 2, Vespoli boats, Hudson, they all rode together during the 70s. And it's really a history lesson of how those people developed their careers then in rowing. So
one of the comments that was put online about that was how you could trace a family tree of coaches who'd been coached by prior coaches who'd been coached by prior coaches. And I thought, actually visualizing that could be really entertaining, couldn't it?
Very, very much so. I mean, his coach was Ernie Arlett, who was from Henley on Thames, and Ernie had been a professional sculler. So he brought that knowledge to Northeastern and to the university in Boston. And, that was pretty outstanding in those days because professional oarsmen were not allowed to coach rowing at the university level for many, many years in the United States. After the boycotts in the 1920s of professional sculling, you could not be a professional coach at an Ivy League school. You had to be an amateur. So Larry was privy to a lot of insider information from a person who, made his living as a professional sculler, moving, making boats go fast. So those are, you want to listen to those people. So
there's also a book published just this week about the history of professional sculling. If you're interested, go to the Hear the Boat Sing blog, which is a rowing history blog, and there's an interview with the author, and he goes through in an enormous amount of detail how the amount of rowdiness, the amount of betting, the amount of races being thrown, deliberately for money by professionals, and how professional sculling races is the only professional sport that's ever been banned.
Yeah, it's great. I have this book of Charles Courtney, who was a professional sculler back in the day too. But it's fascinating to read those accounts, and the history is what, it's interesting to trace the history and see what was going on back then. It was crazy.
I know you could earn a lot of money as a professional sculler, whether you won or you lost. And there were incidents like someone would come and saw their boat in half the night before.
Oh yes. And there was in Troy, New York, which is right near Albany, there was a company called Waters and Company, or Waters and Brothers, but they built paper shells. So the professional sculler would buy a paper shell. They were the exact weight of today's boats, but they were laminated paper and varnish, laminated. So they were not very durable for a long time, but they were very light and stiff. And they built some of the professional boats that the people like Ned Hanlon and the Biglin brothers, and people that these would row, so it was quite interesting. And Bill Miller, who writes on Hear the Boat Sing, he had a lot of historical information about this. He was my head coach at Boston University. So
there you go, tracing the line.
Yes. We do have it, really. It's, if you go back, but that would be fascinating, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, it really would. So thank you for sticking with us with Faster Masters Rowing Radio. We're part of the Rowing Chat Network. You can get email notifications of our upcoming episodes and our published episodes. Just go to rowing.chat and sign up to the newsletter. This has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. Become the athlete that you want to row with. Have a fantastic Easter weekend, everybody. And Marlene and I will be back with you next week. Till next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.